Hello and welcome. Dr. Mackenzie talking about negotiations today. So we have some terms that I like to introduce to you, or you probably already know them. So let's bring them forward and keep them in mind when we're doing negotiations. We're talking about negotiations in this particular case because it is a huge component for the conflict management. The idea behind the conflict management and negotiation is, if you have read our book, is that the conflict, we have to keep it under control, and then we have to decide what the outcome of that conflict is going to be. Generally, there will be goals that we are after or things that we want to attain, and there are those things that the other party wants to attain or achieve or complete. So that creates a conflict. Generally, in business, conflict should be something manageable, and hence the topic. However, other times when there is a lot of emotion behind it, the management of a conflict can be very difficult. Well, let's take the first approach. In business, managing the conflict, usually we want to resolve it. To resolve it, we have to negotiate. A couple of terms that I like to bring forward are the BATNA and the ZOPA. These are terms that you can find pretty much when you do a Google search nowadays and you want to talk about negotiations. Now, as we talk about these topics or these terms within the negotiation construct, keep in mind that we are achieving a conflict management. So you have to add a second layer behind the negotiation, right? So, BATNA, let's start with that term. It stands for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So essentially, I have a conflict. I am after something. I have a goal in mind. What can I live with and what I can't, right? And then we have the ZOPA, which stands for Zone of Possible Agreement. That's my personal favorite. Because when we get to the ZOPA, that's when we really can pursue a negotiation. And generally, the decision or the resolution of that negotiation is going to be somewhat satisfactory, generally. Here's where I ask you to think about the previous chapters or the previous content we have reviewed in a collaborative or cooperative negotiation versus a combative one. So think about those two types of negotiation. And let's bring back this concept. So here is essentially a diagram that is going to help us. So it's a little difficult, but let me use my mouse to point out, and of course let me use colors primarily. On the top, you see the green color. So there is the negotiator, and so you see a green line right above that ZOPA word. So that green line over the yellow and away from the yellow, all of that is called a BATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And so if you see the continuum on the position for the negotiator goes to his or her disadvantage. And we don't necessarily want to go too far. So he has to put a stake in the ground. And that preference is where the BATNA begins. And also, the other position, they don't want to overdo something or oversell something or overcommit to something up until a certain point. So that's where the BATNA for the negotiator ends. Now, similar, look on the red. We have the negotiator B, or the red negotiator, also has a limit. On the left, which is his favorable or her favorable position, that's the preference. And then that red line slides through all the way to where the BATNA word ends. All of that is that BATNA, the best alternative. Well, then you have where the BATNA ends for one and it ends for the other. So where the BATNA green ends and the BATNA red ends, that's what creates the ZOPA. And that is the zone of possible agreement, which means if red negotiator is beyond his or her BATNA, there is probably not going to be a good resolution on that negotiation. I mean, the negotiation can continue, but it won't be successful. And so now, to finish, think about the conflict. Instead of a negotiated sale or trade, we're talking about negotiating terms of employment, negotiating terms of scheduling, work hours, positions, locations of work, systems, materials, resources, etc. So all of those will have a best alternative. So you have to first figure that out. For these, we have talked about the brainstorming. There are 4 rules for brainstorming. Follow those. Make sure you have enough ideas to run with so you can create a very healthy BATNA. Healthy meaning long enough or large enough so that you can consider the other person's best alternatives. The other person will have to do the same thing, and here's where you are a great negotiator. If you have this in mind and get into management of a conflict, and the other person doesn't necessarily have the best negotiation skills, it is up to you to help them define that BATNA. So be prepared not only to have your BATNA ready to go, but also you may have to, on the go, help the other party figure out what their BATNA is. Now, of course, you don't want to necessarily give away yours, but questions usually help, because once you have an idea what they are willing to do and what they're definitely not willing to do, that helps you decide also how far you want to give up or how much do you want to take, right? So this is where you get into the collaborative. So the combative is, or the animosity that you add to it, the emotion that you add to it, will have a huge impact into whether or not you negotiate for that conflict, and the conflict will be resolved. Remember, look at this as a transaction, but know that sometimes the emotion will get charged. When that happens, the conflict will take a very negative connotation, and then this is going to be left aside, and then it'll be more of a combative aspect where you said, and I am going to make you feel, and you want to avoid that, which is why we review the emotional intelligence component, because it's not necessarily a benefit for your negotiation. This is negotiation as it relates to conflict management. I hope these 2 terms help you and the context of how to use them when we are managing conflict. Thank you, and I'll talk to you next time.